What's up, everybody, and welcome to the show, to this special live stream tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of an intro that I threw together. I just wanted to have fun with it and kind of get the excitement going and whatnot. So thank you all for joining me tonight in this special live stream with Dr. Bradley. I'll bring him up in a second. I'm not going to do the normally what I usually do is say hello to everyone because it'll take up so much time and we are limited on time. So hopefully you guys can understand that. Now, once I bring Dr. Bradley up, we'll do the introduction there. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion and whatnot. If you can, once we get to the question section of this, you're going to have to put the questions in all caps. I do have a 15-second delay for you folks. Because it's going to get a little crazy sometimes. I did have some folks email me some questions as well, and we'll touch on those first, and then we'll get into some viewer questions as well. So hopefully you guys will be intrigued and entertained and informed this evening. And if you don't forget to hit that thumbs up and support the channel, I truly appreciate that. All right, so on with the show. What's up, Dr. Bradley? How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, truly appreciate
that intro, by the way.
Did you like it? I was wondering.
Yeah,
I was going to say. I had fun with it, man. I had fun. I thought it was pretty awesome, and I was like, it'll try to bring that in all together.
Yeah, my heart was pounding.
Right on, man. Right on. So there's a lot of new folks on the channel. If you could please do so, introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Yep, sure. So I'm Arthur Bradley. I have a PhD in electrical engineering from Auburn University. My day job is at NASA. I'm not here as a representative of NASA, to be clear, but that's my day job. I have a lot of other interests and activities. I'm an author. I've written a bunch of books. You're going to talk about some of them, I think, tonight. I'm also a teacher. I teach at a local college. I've started a business, and I've done a bunch of different things over the years, I guess. But so my expertise primarily here tonight is to talk about electromagnetic pulse attacks, and people have questions about how to protect yourself from that. So I'm at your disposal.
Awesome. I appreciate that, man. And again, thank you for taking the time out to come on the show. And a lot of folks are saying hello to myself and you as well. And like I said, me and Dr. Bradley had a great interview about 7 or 8 months ago. It was a pretty good time. So we're going to touch on some of those same subjects and whatnot, because a lot of the folks here are new and first time meeting you. And also, I want to say that Dr. Bradley does have a channel here on YouTube called the EMP Doctor. And he also has a website. To say that, I want to say it's all down in the description down below. And if you go to the website, Dr. Bradley does offer a lot of different EMP products and books and things like that. And if you use my discount code, which is grade 10, it'll save you a couple of bucks off a purchase in there. Just want to kind of plug that first before we get started. So everybody knows it's down there. All right. So some folks, shift engineering, that we are. So some folks are probably going to ask, there's a difference of what a CME is, a solar flare, and an EMP. There's 3 different types of things, at least from my understanding, that can occur. And if you wanted to kind of break those down and elaborate on which each one of them are to help folks understand that whole process of what the sun does.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The sun is extremely complicated, and I'm not an expert on the sun, but I know enough to know what affects us. And so the main thing that we have to worry about from the sun in terms of like affecting our planet is from a coronal mass ejection, which is a CME, which is really just a big plasma. And a plasma just means a blob of charged energy. So you have this big blob of charges that can then burp out from the sun and wash over the planet, right? And when it does that, it perturbates our magnetic field lines of the planet, as you'd expect. You have all this charge affecting your magnetic field lines, and that can introduce currents that flow on the surface of the Earth, all right? And those currents, they don't affect little things like my cell phone and stuff from a CME. They affect long conductors like transmission lines for power grids and things like that. And that current can then generate, that ground currents can generate potentials that flow currents back and forth on those power lines. And you can blow out transformers and cause a lot of problems. And so CMEs are the big threat in terms of actually affecting the planet because they could take out our power grid and other national infrastructures. And we've had some big ones. We've had a couple that have missed us just barely in the last 10 years or so. And so it's really a question of when is the next big one going to hit the Earth? Everybody's probably heard of the Carrington event. There'll be something like that that hits us again, probably not too long, certainly in my lifetime, I think. And the question is, how much of the grid will it take down? How long will it stay down? You know, how much damage will there be? And you can hear predictions all the way from end of times, you know, to, oh, well, you know, in a couple of days, we'll be back up and going. And you can talk about why people believe one or the other. The truth is nobody knows for certain. They can model things like that, but we've never had a big CME wash over the Earth, a really big one, since we've been a modern world. So we really don't know exactly what it will do. But that's the big threat from the sun. There are solar flares, which are different. They're not a plasma. They're really more of a wave, and that like a radiated wave, if you want to think about it that way. And they can certainly disturb communications. You'll see radio systems and things have trouble communicating when you get a big solar flare. They can cause damage to cells if you're at very high altitudes, like for astronauts. So they can be a radiation hazard to astronauts and cause some health issues. There are even some that believe if you're up high enough in an airplane, you could perhaps affect some negative effects from a large solar flare. But us on the ground, our planet has this beautiful thing that protects us from solar flares, this atmosphere and this magnetic field. And so we don't really see any, you know, we don't burn up when a giant solar flare happens, and our grid won't go down or anything like that. The solar flare really affects the atmosphere and the communications primarily. So it can affect us, but it's brief, typically days, and it's mostly for communications. So CMEs and solar flares from the sun, two different things. CMEs, one thing interesting is you can see them coming, right? There are these, like I said, these big burps of plasma that washes out from the sun. We have all these satellites sitting around the sun, and they go, whoa, what was that? You know, and they can see it going, and they can radio up ahead. It doesn't travel at the speed of light. And so they can radio ahead and give you a couple days notice and say, hey, something's coming your way. And then the Earth could potentially do something about it. We could get ready in some way. We don't get ready, by the way. We just kind of watch it come and we, you know, predict what's going to happen. But solar flares are a little different in that they travel out as an electromagnetic wave, and they travel at the speed of light. So you really don't, you think about, yes, oh, I just saw it, but your reporting of it is going to travel at the same speed as the wave. And so it's going to arrive as the warning arrives. And so you can't really warn of the flares, but you can warn of the CMEs. And since CME is the bigger threat, it's probably worthwhile that we're watching the sun and giving ourselves some early warning. Now the EMP is a little bit different. Some people talk about the sun as if it generates an EMP, and in a way, I guess it does because it's a pulse of electromagnetic energy. But most of the time when we're talking about EMPs, we're really talking about a nuclear generated EMP, where you take a nuclear missile high up in the atmosphere, a few hundred miles, and you detonate it, and it creates an effect on the magnetic field lines again of the Earth that essentially causes two things to happen. You get the same effect that the sun gave you with a CME, where these long conductors get big currents on them, which is not good for our grid. But you also get this very brief pulse of radiated energy, meaning it just goes through the air, radiated energy that can damage all kind of small scale electronics, like your cell phone or like your radios or like your car or your computers. Very different than a sun effect, which can't do that. But an EMP has the ability to damage both small things as well as these large infrastructures. And so it's kind of a worst case of the two. You know, it has both effects. So something to be worried about a little bit.
Truly intriguing, and thank you for that explanation. In your perspective or your opinion, do you feel what would be more of a worst case scenario, a CME or an EMP, or do they both hold about the same weight?
Well, strictly from a technical standpoint, an EMP is probably worse because, again, you get that radiated E1 effect that can damage a lot of things that a CME couldn't. And also, you've probably just started a nuclear war, right? There's certainly some kind of global conflict now that's about to start up. So there's lots of problems there, even if you happen to be at the outskirts. That's not going to go unanswered. Whereas a CME is a natural, it's a natural thing that's going to happen, and we're kind of all in that together. It's not likely to just hit one continent. It's likely to spread around a portion of the earth and affect many countries. So while it might be a bigger area, perhaps, I think it probably could be dealt with better because it wouldn't be viewed, it's not a hostile act of another nation. You don't have that part of it to deal with. So that's what I think.
Okay. No, that's kind of where I've read in the research I've done as well. Because it's, to me, the way I look at an EMP, it's more of like a tactical thing that someone would use for a specific region versus a coronal mass ejection that would engulf the entire planet and the entire world would be affected by something like that. So it's nice to have a differentiate between the two. And of course, like you said, because we've seen a lot of things in the news, with the hypersonic missiles, and we've heard, it's always speculation that, this person has a satellite capable of, detonating an EMP over the United States and stuff like that. But then you said that's basically an active war. But who knows, right? It's always that possibility in life.
Yeah, and I would well, in some way, I would rather the universe be the one that's getting us as opposed to each other. Maybe we as a species could pull together and make it through it. Whereas if we're all fighting each other, it doesn't sound real good for us.
Agreed. That'd be utter chaos, pretty much. Utter chaos. So some folks are gonna be on wondering, like, what is the, and because you have an entire basically. Your channel kind of just dives into a lot of, and I just watched, matter of fact, a side note, I just watched your everyday carry video. Pretty awesome. I like that one. Because he's not only, he's not only an EMP and CME kind of guy, he's also a preparedness guy. So I like folks to know that as well. That's why you blend so well in this community. And folks need to kind of, watch your content as well, because it's very informative. But to get to my point, is basically that you have different, you sell different types of products and things to help protect vehicles and your home and stuff like that in regards to, CMEs or EMPs and stuff like that. And I wanted to see if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and how some of that stuff works, sure. You sell that might be able to help folks out there who are wondering, well, what do I do? How do I protect my stuff? And then we can also dive in after that to like some of the misnomers that some people have, these assumptions that help.
Yeah, sure. And to be clear, I'm not here to sell anything. Okay. So if there's sometimes there's like cheap ways that, $1.99 roll of aluminum foil will take care of you. And I always tell people that. And so I invite people to look around for cheap options on things. I'm not out to sell anything, but I did, when I was very interested in EMP preparedness and first investigating it, I wanted to know, is there a way to protect your equipment, like from an EMP? Is there some way to protect your most crucial equipment? And the short answer is the easiest way is to shield it, right? Disconnect it from everything you can and shield it in some way. And that's your best bet of protecting it. And there's a number of ways to do that. Like I said, you can put something in a box and wrap the box in aluminum foil. That does a really good job. And it's very cheap. You can also buy like conductive cloth, like at the website, we sell conductive cloth that you can drape over generators and things like that. But there are a lot of people who want something that can help protect their electronics when it's in operation. So I developed a few products. They're called the TRAP products, transient reducing auxiliary plugs. And they're not magical things. They're just these big transient suppressors that you can put in, like you can put them in your cigarette lighter of your car to act as a transient suppression point. You can put them across your battery of your car to act as a transient suppression point. And they're really, really fast. They're fast enough to clamp on at the time of an E1, which is sort of the trick of doing transient suppression, is it has to be super, super fast. So that's the idea of those transient protection parts. And there's a number of other things too. There's some ferrites that you can put around your house power wires that help reduce that surge that might come in from the power lines. Because you would love for your house to, all your electronics to survive an EMP, so that if you have a generator, you can roll it out and hook it up and still function, or if you have solar panels, you can get your system up going. Or if your neighbor has a generator, and you can hook up into his with the exchange of, hey, you can come on over and cook your food because, your systems aren't working. So it's nice to have functional, a household functioning of set of appliances and equipment. So I have a number of protective items like ferrites and traps and things you can go take a look at. Again, they're just things that as an engineer of 30 years or so, I sort of put my knowledge to use and said, how would I protect products like that, and tried to come up with some unique things that would do that. So I just invite folks to take a look at it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I've looked at a lot of different things that you have, and I think some of them could definitely be beneficial in regards to that. Now, that being said, you were talking about some affordable ways that people can use for, things like, let's say, I know we've talked about the whole trash can thing, the microwave thing. People have had these different things. If you want to, touch upon that, some more affordable ways, if someone just has some things around the house that they might be able to use that could possibly benefit them in the possibility of a CME or an EMP.
Yeah. So again, if it's a CME, really the only protection you have is to unplug from the wall, because again, the energy is all coming in from the power lines. There's no energy in the air per se that's going to couple into these small electronics. So CME's threat to you personally is only what is connected into the grid. So you want to protect your radio system from a CME, you unplug it from the wall. If it's plugged in, it might bring in unwanted energy. Now an EMP is a little tougher because yes, you got to worry about what comes in the wall, so you got to unplug things, but you also have anything with an antenna might bring in the energy that direction. And even things that are just small circuits that, just the traces on the circuit boards are long enough to couple in energy that might damage those sensitive circuits. And so really everything is kind of potentially able to be damaged. The more modern it is, the more solid state electronics you have, the more likely it is to be damaged. So a big heavy duty Briggs and Stratton generator, that you pull start, that's not going to get damaged by an EMP. But if you have like a new Honda, super slick one with the digital displays and the controls, maybe, because it's got a lot of solid state stuff in it. So that one might be worth storing away in a shielded container. And you mentioned like the galvanized garbage can. That's a good low cost solution. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and spend, I don't know, $25 and buy a big garbage can, big metal garbage can. Put in maybe a conductive gasket around the lid so that it seals nice and tight. It's really important that it seals metal to metal all the way around. And then put your stuff in there. If you want to line it with cardboard, that's fine too. And then put your stuff in there. And it does a great job. I mean, you can get 70 dB of shielding from a garbage can, which is fantastic. So yeah, there's low cost solutions like that. Some people have used an old microwave, like you mentioned. They do pretty good. It's not as good as a good galvanized garbage can, but it's pretty good. And most things, if you put them in there, it would probably survive. Yeah. So there are some low cost options that you can use to do that. Or you can buy big fancy Faraday cages. I know at the Disaster Preparedness site, they sell like a big box system where you can wrap it with this really rugged, like radiant barrier type material, which is sort of like aluminum foil, but really, really rugged. And I made one for a video I posted on YouTube, and I guess it's a meter cubed. A meter cube doesn't sound big, but it's pretty big when you're building it. And, you build this thing up, and I don't know, maybe it costs a couple $100s to build it, but it's really a lot of space that you could store a lot of items in, and not terribly expensive if you're going to only build one of them. So anyway, lots of options.
Yeah, that's definitely intriguing to say the least, because that's a lot of people's fear is what if and how do they protect their stuff. And it goes to the old saying, a lot of folks say, if you buy a car pre-1965 or, things like that, because so many vehicles. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it seems like the entire planet is going to like electrical vehicles. Everything is going to be, microchipped, and everything is digital and that kind of stuff like that. And I'm just wondering if we are asking for a major disaster, an aspect of like, let's say a CME, like would they affect like, let's say a Tesla vehicle or some of the smart vehicles out there because they're kind of like on their wheels are rubber and whatnot? Like I was wondering that.
CME wouldn't affect an electric vehicle unless it's plugged in. Of course, they are plugged in a lot, right? So it's possible to affect it through that. Now an EMP, I don't know that anybody's ever studied whether an EMP would be worse for an electric vehicle or a modern gas vehicle, because modern gas vehicles have hundreds of microprocessors in them. They have all kind of controllers that control everything, and any one of those could potentially be damaged. And so I don't know. I mean, yes, it seems like electric vehicles are more sophisticated, but I'm not sure you'd have to do tests to see which were actually more susceptible. The only thing I think that makes electric vehicles more susceptible is that they are plugged in for a great deal of the time. And so any energy that came in through the power lines potentially could come into the car. And that might make a big difference. And you might or might not know that the CME, depending who you are and what you're watching, whether the CME was coming.
Right.
And if you left your vehicle plugged in at that time, yeah, I could see there being perhaps some wide scale damage to things like that.
That makes sense then, because I was just always curious about that. And like I said, I had some people send me some questions, and we'll touch on that as well. Folks, in regards to questions for the doctor, I have some questions already. If you want to wait another 15 minutes or so, then I'll ask you folks, the viewers, to just start putting your questions in all caps. So if you want to hold, I did copy and paste a couple questions already that I saw come across there, but it's hard for me to try to keep an eye on that. So hold your questions if you can for just a little bit longer, because I have another topic that I want to talk about that I was talking to the doc about before we came on here. And I don't know how many of you folks are familiar with this. I've been doing research myself, and instead of me doing a video on it, I wanted to bring it up now with someone who might have a little bit more knowledge on this topic myself. I don't know how many folks have heard of the Kessler Syndrome, and it's a very intriguing thing for me. It's another possibility out there that could have lasting effects on our population or civilization or the way of life. And I was going to let you take it away from here, Dr. Bradley, and kind of explain what the Kessler Syndrome is, and then we'll dive into a couple of questions.
Sure. Yeah. And, I should know all about this since I work at NASA, but it's outside of my range. NASA is a big organization, and I build electronics for satellites. And so, I can talk about electronics we build, but it is something I've looked at, and I've been involved a little bit about it. So people may know that when you launch something up into space, well, it has to go somewhere eventually. Let's say it's orbiting the planet, right? If it's at a low enough altitude, down in LEO, what they call low Earth orbit, it will hit the atmosphere. It will drag on the atmosphere, and eventually the atmosphere will pull it back down in, and it will get burned up, and maybe a small piece of it will go crash into the Indian Ocean or something, right? And that's fine, because it's sort of a self-cleaning system. Even the space station is right at the edge of that. They have to boost the space station every so often to raise it back up a little bit, because it's sinking down. It's sort of being pulled down a little bit. I forget how much it is. It's pretty significant. I don't know, 100 feet a year or something. I mean, it comes down. And so you have to, these things are brought down and cleaned up sort of on their own, but it takes a long time to bring them down. And all of that's fine if the satellites are just sort of put up there and they all stay and where the orbits are supposed to be. But, every once in a while, something doesn't work the way you want, and you no longer have control of it, and it crashes into another satellite, or it crashes into something else, a piece of a comet or something else. Something hits it and it gets destroyed, and they fail spectacularly. They're not meant to stay together, and so thousands of pieces of junk fly off of these impacted satellites. And so over the history now of putting things up in space, we have more than 1 million pieces of little junk floating around the planet, orbiting the planet, at various altitudes. And some of it's in a cloud, and some of it's in more of like a ring shape, depending on what altitude it is. The problem is that as you get up higher, they don't hit the atmosphere and they don't come back down. And so you kind of just leave this junk up there. And all that sounds fine until you launch something up. Maybe you put up your new $1 billion satellite, and a bolt from some previous 1971 satellite hits the satellite and just blows a hole right through the thing. All right, because these things are traveling at tens of thousands of miles an hour. So any little debris at all can destroy what you've put up there. And there's a story, I don't remember what year it was, of a paint fleck, a fleck of paint from some defunct satellite striking the space station, or maybe it was a space shuttle. I think it was a space shuttle, and cracking one of its windows. And so that's just a fleck of paint, right? But it was moving at, tens of thousands of miles an hour. And so the point is that the more things that are destroyed accidentally, one hits another and it gets destroyed. And then now you got 30,000 pieces floating around, and space is big, but eventually statistically things start to hit. You get enough of that and you get a domino effect. And it's sort of this cascading effect. And that's what the Kessler Syndrome is really talking about. And essentially, you get this domino thing where you can no longer control it. And all of the things that are up there, or nearly all of them, start being hit and broken apart. And you end up with these huge clouds of debris. We're not there yet, but if you looked at the maps, if you just pull up a map of orbital debris around the planet, it sure looks like we're there, because we track many, many thousands of parts floating around, all this junk. And there are many, many of them that we don't track because they're just too small. I think we track to maybe like 2.5 inches. Anything, 2.5 inches or bigger, we track. but there's all kinds of stuff that are smaller floating around that could still take out a space station or a space shuttle or something like that, or a satellite that we don't track. And so we don't know where exactly they're at. It's just a roll of the dice, whether we get hit or not. And so the point being is the Kessler Syndrome is really describing that condition by which this cascading has occurred, and you just end up with these uncontrollable clouds of debris around the planet. And what you think, if you think about who cares, right? What does that matter? But it matters because then you can't put anything else up in space, and all of your space assets start being destroyed. And you might even have trouble launching rockets and other things that might get hit as they're trying to go up and out. And so it becomes a big problem. And eventually you can land lock your planet in a weird sort of way where you've created this artificial destructive barrier around your planet, which is crazy to think about, but that's kind of where we're headed. Now, a lot of people know about it. That's the good news. It's not like a secret. All the countries know about it. All the space powers know about it. And they don't all treat it the same. You might remember I think it was in November, Russia destroyed one of their own satellites on purpose with a rocket, because I think they wanted to see if they could do it. And it was a message to the world, right? Hey, we can take out your satellites if we need to. And so, but they decided we'll blow up one of our old ones. And it was marvelous. I mean, militarily, I'm sure it was a big success, but it sent 6,000 pieces of more space debris flying everywhere. And that's hit various things that you can track it. I think there was something of the Chinese that was hit by it. And so anyway, not everyone's taking it equally seriously, but everyone is aware of it. And the major space entities, the Russians, the Chinese, Americans, Europeans, they have all looked at various projects to try and help clean up that space debris. It's a very challenging problem. I can tell you that. I've seen some proposals that companies have put in, and they're everything from giant sticky blankets, that unfold like mile wide. And they try and catch this small stuff and then deorbit the blanket, to magnetic systems, to nets, to all kinds of things. And I don't know which ones, harpoons. They had one that with these rocket bodies are up there floating around. I remember reading a proposal where you launched a satellite system, and it came in close proximity and got into the right tumble with the rocket, the rocket booster, what was left, and it shot a harpoon into it and grabbed it and then deorbited them together, which is an interesting idea. I don't think they built that, but I might be wrong. So there are a number of ideas of how to help with this, but it's not a problem that's been solved yet. And so it's a very interesting thing. If they can look up Kessler Syndrome or orbital space debris, and they can learn all about it.
I appreciate that. And from your opinion, like I said, with the 3 questions I have is, if that was to occur, how bad do you think the effects would be on the planet if all the satellites were destroyed?
Yeah, that'd be bad, right? That'd be really bad. We rely on our satellites for a lot of things, from weather prediction to communications to GPS. I mean, there's a lot of things we rely on our satellites for. So if they couldn't be, if we started taking them out routinely, I think you'd see the effects across lots of parts of life, daily life. And I don't know all of the things, how it would all play out, because I'm not sure. Militarily, obviously, we watch a lot of our enemies with satellites, and so that would have its own ramifications. So it would be a big deal if you got to a point where statistically satellites lived a very short time because they would be hit by debris. That would be a big deal.
Right.
I read that even the new James Webb Space Telescope, which I think is 1 million miles from Earth now, they said it absolutely will be hit by space debris at some point. And it's just statistically, they think they could probably survive certain strikes to it, and other strikes would take it. It's just a guess. It's just like, how lucky are you? But yeah, so it can be a big deal. So I don't know how bad, but I think it would affect our life on the planet for a long time.
Thank you for that. And second question in regards to that, we only have 3 questions in regards to that. That was the first one. The second one is, do you know if NASA or the U.S. government has a backup plan if all the satellites are destroyed?
No, I don't know that. I can't imagine there really is, an equivalent backup plan for anyone. My guess is if things started to get where, we statistically saw lots of collisions occurring, the global powers would make that a priority to try and reduce that space debris. There's a point at which I think it's easier to solve. If there's still big things up there, you can go up and get the big things, right, and bring them down, right? And that helps a lot because it won't get broken up anymore. Right. But if everything's already into little pieces, it's a much harder problem to solve. Things like those big nets and those big sticky sheets and stuff, And I always raise my eyebrows when I'm thinking of giant sticky sheets that you're unfolding in space trying to catch little bolts and things. I don't know. It doesn't sound feasible to me, but maybe they'll come up with some clever ways to do that.
Peter Rouse says Elon has a backup plan. Who knows?
Yeah.
He might. Who knows?
Maybe.
And last question in regards to the Kessler Syndrome is, and I think you kind of touched on this. It says, would the Kessler Syndrome keep us from launching rockets in the future? If so, how long might it last?
Yeah, I think it could. The good thing about a rocket is it goes through the regions very quickly, right, as you're going up and out. And so statistically, you're less likely to get hit by something. But if it got bad enough that you couldn't launch rockets without a very high probability that you wouldn't be hit, like 99.99%, then you wouldn't launch because there's just too much cost of life, right? You don't kill your astronauts off. It's just, every time we have an accident like that, it sets the whole program back by at least 10 years, maybe 20 years. And so you just can't afford to lose those kinds of things. So it could definitely affect it. I don't think it would as much as like it would affect our satellite systems, but it could still affect it. And I know there's even worry now when we launch things of whether or not something might hit it that's too small to be tracked.
Right on. I appreciate you taking the time to answer that. It's just something that I've been looking at. And like I said, like I told you, a good friend of mine has been looking at, and it's just like one of those things that a lot of people don't talk about too much. We hear all the other disaster scenarios, but the Kessler Syndrome, I don't see it talked about as much as it possibly could be, because it could be life altering as well, like you said. All right. So before we get into any questions and stuff like that, two other things I want to talk about. First, I think I should have just pulled it out. Well, first I'll let you talk about your fiction book, which is the Survivalist series. Phenomenal series that you wrote. And I'm at the edge of my seat because I'm waiting for the next edition to come through. And we talked about that, and hopefully maybe this year. But if you want to give folks, a lot of folks here have read a lot of different books from a lot of different authors. And I wanted to share your book with these folks, the Survivalist series. If some of you folks are familiar with it, but I wanted Dr. Bradley to talk a little bit about it. Because it's quite interesting before we get into the whole questions, because I know we have a lot of questions in regards to CMEs and EMPs, and we'll touch on those. But
so I love a good fiction. I love a good story, especially a good apocalyptic story as well as the next guy. And so, I don't know how many years it's been now. Must have been 7 or 8 years ago. I decided to write a book called The Survivalist, Frontier Justice, which was the first book in the series. I didn't know if I was ever going to write another one, by the way. It was the first really fictional book I had put my really heart into. And it's a story about two different groups of people. One is a U.S. Marshal finds a dog, sort of the classic, gunslinger finds a dog and wanders the wasteland trying to make right a world that's really messed up. And then the other side is his father, who there's two camps of people. People either love the Marshal or they love the father, who's an ex-con who escapes from jail and sort of adopts this young girl, and they sort of, they're trying to get her home for much of the story. And they both have very different ways of dealing with the threats around them. And I did that intentionally because we both have the yin and the yang in us, and I really highlighted those differences. On one side, you have this honorable, extremely deadly, talented U.S. Marshal, but he lives by certain codes and follows certain rules. And on the other side, you have this guy that's just brutal, violent without necessary. Even if it's not necessary, he's willing to be violent at any point, but not a bad guy, just a guy willing to do whatever. And I sort of walk both those paths, and it's a lot of fun to put yourself in the shoes of those people and think, well, what would I have done in that circumstance? And could I have gotten out of that circumstance? And many times people agree or disagree with what the characters do. And I have them make mistakes on purpose, or I have the things not go out the way they think on purpose. Or sometimes I have the characters do things that are true to them, but maybe I know would offend the reader. But it's important that people really think it through. Not all of us are perfect John Wayne. Sometimes things go wrong. Like the Marshal has his problem with women, for example. There's always a woman problem that's causing him, gets him nearly killed a number of times. And the guy who's the father, Tanner Raines, he has his problems with kind of like showing mercy to people and stuff like that, and sort of having that softer side to him. So anyway, it's a story about a pandemic that destroys the world and these two groups of people that sort of go out and try and survive. And the name of the book is The Survivalist. And it's just really a story about they wander lots of different places across the United States and get into all kinds of trouble. And there's some mutant people that have been affected by the virus. And, so it goes a little non-realistic, but it's a lot of fun if you're into that sort of thing. There's 12 books.
Yeah, 12 of them. And I went through all of them. I read through all of them. Well, I use audiobooks. I'm a cheat. I'm a cheat when it comes to that because I like to listen to things when I go to sleep and whatnot, so I can get through these books. But it was just very intriguing because you employ or you use a lot of different prepper things inside this, because technically the marshal is a prepper. You know what I mean? The way he has some of his stuff set up and stuff like that. And that was just quite intriguing.
Yeah.
And then of course the whole I think is it's smallpox 99, if I recall that correctly.
Superpox
99. And it was just very intriguing how everything played itself out and then how it escalated. And it actually, to me, it has some validity into the way things transpire and how folks are going to react in a chaotic environment in a situation like that.
Yeah.
So to get on the nonfiction side of things, and if you guys see here, this is a national bestseller. This is a national bestseller. I don't know if you guys can see it on there. The doctor wrote this book as well. This is the 3rd edition by Arthur Bradley. And it has a lot of great essentials in there. I talk about prepper libraries all the time. This is a must-have. This is one of the must-haves. I'm reaching out because I have stacks of books over there, but this is a very great book. And then you've also done a couple other books outside of this when I was looking at some of your bio that you just popped up just recently as well, I think, right?
Yeah, I did. That's sort of the big volume of sort of a compilation of lots of knowledge about preparedness. I think it's a good book. If I were only going to buy one, I'd recommend buy that one. But there's also a book called The Prepper's Instruction Manual, which is really 50 significant steps people can take to get better prepared. And it's everything from storing food to, whatever all those different steps are. And there's just like a set of scenarios that you read the scenario and then what kind of preparations would be important to have for that. So it's not as big of a book, but it has a lot of the same information, just presented differently.
Okay.
And then there's one that's just on EMP attacks and solar events. And so that one's it's a smaller book. It only focuses on EMP things, but it has some specific details about what works protective wise and what doesn't, and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, people often get all 3 of them. You can get a bundle deal if you buy them at disasterprepare.com. But if you're only going to get one, I'd say get the handbook because it has a lot of information about food, water, electricity, you name it. It's got a lot of good stuff in there.
And speaking of which, if you guys, like I said, not to do a shameless plug, but the website is down below. And if you use grade 10, you do get 10% off anything that you happen to purchase in that store. But to me, it just has a lot of value in this book, especially folks who are just getting into the preparedness community and trying to, understand a lot of different things. This has a lot of great information, and I like how it's geared towards the family preparedness, because that's where I like to preach on here is family preparedness as well. And it's a great book. And that's what I'm trying to let people know out here in the community, and specifically in the great community, as we like to call it, is that you're a NASA scientist and you're great at CMEs and EMPs, but you're also a fellow prepper in the preparedness community as well. So you kind of you blend with this, brother.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, great book. I'm almost down to the end of it, because regardless of how experienced I think I am, I always like to get other information from other folks, and I value this type of information. So truly appreciate you sending me this book. I cherish it because you signed it.
Oh, cool.
So I appreciate that one. I'm gonna set that down there for now. All right, folks. Oh, let me see where we're at. I've been seeing things pass and pass and pass. So, all right, so let's get into some questions. Now I have some questions, some folks that emailed me. So I'm going to touch on those questions first, and then we'll try to do some viewer questions, if that's okay with you, Dr. Bradley.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, so I have 2 questions from Milo on the Ready. He's kind of driving, so he can't really, that's why he sent them to me prior to the show, because he's driving. He can't really type and stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pause that there because people are sending me questions already. I'm going to try to pause that screen while I answer these few questions that we have here. Someone said, how do I get a signed book? I guess you have to contact Dr. Bradley.
Yes. Sometimes I go and give talks and people bring their books and I'll sign them when I give a talk.
Jizza, thank you so much for the super chat. He says these interviews with Dr. Bradley are a treasure trove of knowledge that can be listened to over and over again. And Bizza, I need you to email me because I need to talk to you now that I got your attention. All right. So his first question is, and some of these we've kind of touched on, but it'll be like a little bit repetitive in some of this stuff. So Milo on the Ready asked, he has 2 questions. How effective would a microwave be in a non-nuclear EMP and a nuclear EMP?
Well, by non-nuclear EMP, I don't know if they're talking about like an EMP weapon. Like there are some localized EMP weapons that countries have developed. Either way, it should probably be about equally effective. You can look in the EMP book for the exact numbers, but it provides 30 dB of shielding or 40 dB of shielding across frequency, somewhere in that ballpark, which is pretty darn good. 40 dB is 99% of the energy of the field level has been reduced inside, and so that brings it down to a manageable number at 40 dB that nearly anything can survive. The exceptions to that might be things that are like radio systems. Radio systems are particularly susceptible because they have antennas. What's the purpose of the antenna? Oh, to bring in that radiated energy, right, and amplify it and get it in the system. And if you have a really strong radiated signal, you can blow out those transceivers in the radios. And so that's the only thing maybe I wouldn't feel 100% comfortable storing in a microwave, would be something that was meant like a radio system of some sort. But other things, normal things, I think would be probably fine in there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty much anything with like a little antenna or something on there.
Yeah, those are the things that are easy to damage. Mm-hmm.
His second question is should people with medical devices such as pacemakers be concerned with EMPs?
Maybe, maybe not. It's not no one studied it that I know of. I took a look at it. I don't know. It's been a few years ago. I had a surgeon that was interested in that question send me some data from a pacemaker company, Medtronic, I think it was, big company that makes pacemakers. And, it wasn't in the format that you could draw a firm conclusion. But what I came away with was the impression that, remember, the energy that's most damaging is super fast in time, right? So what I think would happen is pacemakers, some of them might have resets and upsets where you had to get them, you either had to reboot them or do whatever you have to do for these things, but they wouldn't necessarily be physically, zapped and damaged. But I don't know for certain. I haven't done any testing of it, so I can't say for certain that that's the case. But they're meant to withstand, as you can imagine, pacemakers are meant to withstand high RF environments because they don't know where the person's going to go, right? They're going to be right next to a big radio station. They don't want the guy to keel over dead because his pacemaker stopped. So they're meant to withstand that. But it's a question of whether or not that burst of that pulse energy coming into the system might cause damage and have it stop. And I don't know that anyone knows the answer for certain.
I appreciate your honesty. All right. Let me see. Lifelong Patriot, his question is, since the 2017 EMP Commission report that showed the nation's electrical grid's extreme susceptibility to an EMP or CME, and the long lead time, months or years of replacement transformers and other custom-made high-voltage components that have to be made overseas, and many by countries arguably already our adversaries, what steps have been taken by our administration to harden the grid and build up our reserve of spare parts? That's a long one.
Yeah, it's a question that's asked a lot, though, and I don't know the answer very well. I've had a few people who work for power companies, like, we have different interconnects, the 5 interconnects in the U.S., and Texas has its own interconnect. And I know, for example, somebody who worked on the Texas interconnect wrote me and said that they were doing things, they weren't advertising it, but they were doing things to harden the grid. But I think at a national level, I don't think it has happened. I still see people like Dr. Peter Pry, who's a very loud voice for, we need to take this seriously. We're going to be in big trouble. And I support that notion. So I don't think that on a national level, certainly not on an international level, that we've attempted to try and harden the grid from CMEs or EMPs. I don't think we have. There may be some localized things people have done. I doubt it would be nearly enough. And I don't even know that we know how exactly to do it. At one point, the people were talking about, well, if you saw a big CME coming, why don't you just shut the grid off and wait it out for 12 hours? I mean, that would be rough, right? But people could survive for 12 hours. But the thing is, the energy from the CME may not even matter if the grid is active. It may activate and develop those potentials and damage the transformers, even if it's off. And so It wasn't clear from simulations that was a solution. And so there might have to be other solutions taken. And so the short answer, I would say, is, to the best of my knowledge, we as a nation have not taken that seriously enough. And I know there's been some movement, to try and start looking at that stuff, but I don't think it's gone very far.
Homestead Homeboy from NC, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that, the support for the channel. It says, Doctor, what about a grid down from an EMP? What happens with nuclear power plants? Do they have a backup plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wrote an article. If you search the web, you can probably find it. And it was basically asking that question. I wondered too. I'm like, hold on, now we got like 100 nuclear plants around the United States, 100 nuclear reactors. And what happens, right? All of a sudden we got grid down. That could happen in a number of scenarios. What happens to the plants? And so there's no real way to know that information unless you talk to people who work in that industry. And so I called up one of the guys at a power plant. He took my interview and he gave me like a 2-hour interview to ask these questions. And I told him who I was, and he was very upfront about things. And it ended up being a lot better than I thought, which was that, yes, there are a number of backup systems. The first and most important thing is there was an automatic dead man system that when the power went out, it immediately would stop the reaction in the reactor. And so it wasn't like it was going to run away on you just because you couldn't shut it off. Now, it could still run away, but not for that reason. So the dead man kicked in. And then it took like 3 days of like heavy duty cooling to bring the reactor cool enough that if you wanted to, you could open it and get the rods out and put them in a giant swimming pool of boric acid to cool for years, by the way. So it was a process that you had to go. And the key to the whole thing was having coolant. You had to have coolant running. And you think, well, how am I going to have coolant running? Oh, well, we've got these building sized generators on site that we can use. Okay. Well, what happens when the fuel runs out? Well, or what happens if those are damaged? That was my question. Oh, well, if those are damaged, we have these giant portable generators we can roll in and hook it up and long enough to get everything cooled to get into those pools, right? And then to keep the circulation of the pools going. I said, well, what happens when you run out of fuel? He said, well, if you go through all those scenarios where you've lost power in the electrical grid, which it uses typically, and then you lost the building generators, and then you lost the portable generators, and then you can't get fuel, which you can imagine maybe that could happen, then you're in a serious situation. And the serious situation usually means you have to flood the area. And so they're usually built near water supplies, and they'll flood it. They'll drop a barrier of some sort and flood the whole area, because there really is no other option. Because what happens eventually is those pools of water will boil off the water. They expose these rods, and the rods will release gases that then explode, and you spread radioactive particles all over the place. And you don't want that. That's known as Chernobyl, right? So you don't want, that's exactly what happened. So you don't want that sort of thing. So I came away feeling pretty good, though. I came away feeling like they have at least a few layers of protection, and they've thought about it. I didn't catch this guy off guard. He had thought about he said, my family lives here too. Everybody lives here. We don't want them to be exposed to that. So there's these scenarios that we would go through. And they, by the way, don't need permission. He told me they don't need permission to flood it. They don't need Mr. President, no. They have the authority to do it themselves. And so I think it's dangerous. I don't want to underplay it. Certainly something could go wrong because, again, there's around 100 nuclear reactors in the U.S., but I do think that there is some layers of protection there. And so maybe it wouldn't be Armageddon. And like I said, I wrote an article, like a 3-page article, and if somebody wants to find it on the web somewhere, they can. I put a lot of detail of when I interviewed this guy in that article. So
pretty intriguing. Yeah, that's it's definitely good to know that there is some redundancies, but also the possibility that things can really go south quickly. Here we go. So Ibram 1 has a question. It says, how do a device like your trap dissipate the energy, or do we need to be concerned even if we have devices like yours installed after an EMP/CME? What about any non-grounded objects like backyard grills?
Okay. Well, so the trap is really just a transient suppressor, which means that if you think about like in a car, you have these cables. The cables are primarily where the energy is going to couple into, these long wires, right? They're going to act like antennas, and they're going to pick up that energy. And it's really brief in time now. We're talking about nanoseconds in time. And so that's going to develop some potential, some voltages across the wires, which will cause some currents to flow. And if you happen to have a little device that's in that path, you can end up damaging those electronics. So what the trap does is it essentially plugs into the cable assembly. And if you have several in your car, that's even better. And so as the voltages start to rise, eventually at around 33 volts or so, that trap turns on and it won't let it go any higher. It won't let the voltages rise to several hundred volts. At about 33 volts, it's going to clamp it. It won't let it get any more. And so it's at a level that your car will survive, the electronics wouldn't survive. And it's so brief in time. I did the numbers on one of the YouTube videos that even a little component, the trap's only like, it looks like a cigarette plug. It's still way overrated in terms of the actual energy it can take because again, the energy is, yes, it's a huge amount of, it's a huge wave, but it occurs in such a brief period of time that the energy is actually not that high. And so it can absorb it without being damaged and limit that voltage difference and try and prevent damage. Now, it's not perfect because you don't have a trap at every 3 feet in your car, right? And so there's parts of the system that are further away from this transient suppressor, and they're going to be more likely to perhaps be damaged. And that's why I always tell people, if you have, 2 cigarette plugs, put one in each of them and put something across the battery. Now you got 3 points where that energy is being clamped down. And that's the way we protect a lot of electronics, is we put in these transient suppressors on the power lines, and it ends up doing a pretty good job. So that's kind of how they work. Now, I don't know about what the backyard grill comment was. I'm not sure. Freestanding electronics can be damaged by an EMP, but I don't know about a backyard grill because I think they just usually have a little spark lighter, and unless you got a sophisticated grill. I've never had a sophisticated.
I was just reading I copied and pasted right out of the email. Next question is from Angela Picareno. I always pronounce her name wrong. She's asking, I have 2 Faraday cages, but I'm not completely sure of what items need to be in one, or if he suggests we need one at all. Please ask him his thoughts.
Yeah, so Faraday cage is just really a conductive enclosure. We can call any conductive enclosure Faraday cage. And yeah, certainly they're probably the most useful way of protecting small electronics, because you can just stuff them in there. Either they're an EMP bag or they're a trash can or whatever it is, right? And you can store things like, emergency radios or medical devices or backup computers. You can store anything you want that's electronic in them. Like, for example, we keep, a shortwave radio in ours, and things that, you would want to pull out and listen to the emergency band. And so anything electronics that you think might be damaged that you don't use on a daily basis, you can put in a Faraday cage. And everybody's list is a little bit different. I did a video a while back with a bunch of ideas on them. Some people store power tools. Some people store, you just think through, well, what are the things I would need that if they were damaged, I'd really be in bad shape. And that's the kind of things you might want to store.
Right on. Let me see. And then now I'm into, I cut and pasted these 2 right out of the chat, and then I'm going to get into the chat questions. I have my screen paused on this end. Empress Kimberly had asked early in the stream. She says, could you ask the good doctor if it's true that a CME or an EMP can fry wiring in a home, causing the need for rewiring the home for fires, or rewiring the home or fires? Yeah.
So the thing of it is, it's not the E1 or the E2 of an EMP, which is just the phases of the EMP occurring. Things that occur very rapidly like that, it's very difficult to heat up copper wire or metal wire enough to burn it, right? It's things that when you if it's on for a while and you end up heating things and then they end up burning up. And it is possible, certainly, that if you think about a CME, that may last for a while. It may last for an hour. And so you could have elevated voltages on your lines that could cause a lot of current to flow. And yeah, you could cause things to catch on fire. I know back at the Carrington event, they had some fires with the telegraph system, for example.
Right.
An EMP perhaps could do it. I think it's less likely with an EMP, because it's likely with an EMP that even the E3 might be over in minutes. It could last longer, but it could be seconds or minutes. And yes, it's true, there'll be a lot of current flowing on the conductors. And so it's possible, but I think it's more likely, fires are probably more likely with a CME.
All right. And oh, this is an interesting one. Maverick Prepper has a question.
Let me add one thing on that answer.
Okay, go ahead.
It points to one reason why you want to open the breaker on your house if a CME or an EMP occurs. So if you know that this is occurring or about to occur, the best thing you could do for your house and all the electronics and keep preventing fires and everything else is go out and open your main breaker. All right, because that would prevent that long slug of current from heating up everything and causing damage on the wires. So it's a nice thing. If you got nothing else to do, you're like, I don't know what to do. Oh crap, there's something coming. Go out and throw the main breaker until it's subsided, and at least you'll be protected from the energy coming out on power lines.
All right. Homestead Homeboy, thank you again for the super chat. We have a solar on our house, which have spent a lot of money. Will an EMP affect the solar panels?
Maybe. So there's been some studies on the solar power generation systems, and the short answer is this. the panels themselves, if they're not connected to anything, are pretty darn robust. It's difficult to damage a panel that's been just put away somewhere not being used. But once it's connected up to long wires, well, those wires act as antennas and they can bring in energy to it. And it might be connected to the grid, depending on what kind of solar system you have. Sometimes they feed back to the grid to provide energy back. Then you might get a grid pulse that comes through as well, and that can be very damaging. And so there are some steps there's a video I have, or maybe 1 or 2 videos I have about protecting solar power generation systems. So I would just refer them, take a look at my channel, and look at those solar power generation system protections. It comes down to, do you have a good surge protection device, and do you have the right kind of ferrites on the wires? And so you can make it where your system's very unlikely to be damaged, but you got to do a little bit to get there.
I appreciate that. And thank you, Empress Kimberly. Thank you as well for the super chat. I appreciate the support. And Brian, I got you and Thorhaven paused there, and then I have Maverick's question here. Have you ever heard about North Korea putting an EMP producing nukes in their communication satellites?
I've heard those rumors before. So it is true that North Korea, we believe possesses some nuclear capabilities, and they certainly now have possessed better rocket capability than they used to. We're watching that every year get better and better. Mm-hmm. But at the time when they put up the satellites where people were talking about that, they didn't really possess the ability to miniaturize the nuclear warheads small enough to put them in those rockets. That's the expert opinions I read. And so unless they got somebody else's nuclear weapons and put it in their rockets, and I doubt that's the case, they're not trusted really by anybody, is my understanding. I doubt that they have. Now, will they be able to? Maybe. Certainly they have a growing military program, and they're going to get there with their technology. So I don't think they're there yet, but I think they'll get there before long.
Thank you. Let me see here. Thorhaven says, is there a way to protect a large space like a garage/barn to protect a tractor vehicle / generators and stuff like that?
There are ways to protect entire buildings. It just requires a lot of effort, because you have to think about every penetration coming in and out of the building. And so, first of all, there can't be any wires that come into the building like power wires unless they go through a very special kind of filter, an EMP filter. And they sell such things. I can help people if they ever need to find them, but they're pretty expensive. They're thousands of dollars for these filters. And they assure that nothing comes through the power wire into the room and radiates around. And that's important. And then you have to seal the room, as you'd imagine. You can't have any windows, and you got to seal around the doors and things where you have good RF seals. And the walls of the structure need to be conductive. So you either have to put up conductive wallpaper, or the building itself has to be conductive, or you can use conductive paint. There's a number of options. You have to, unless you just want to throw money at it and kind of think, I think I did okay, you really got to hire somebody with some test equipment to say, we've done these things. Oh, look, we're still not quite good enough in this area. And then you fix something, and you have to do some measurements to get confidence that you've built a system, that's really shielded the way you think it is. Now, you can do some of that on the cheap. You can buy your own spectrum analyzers and your own generators that will transmit energy and stuff, but it requires some knowledge. So I just say, unless you're an electronics guy, you probably have to hire somebody to help you with that.
Right. And just a quick side note, what I want to say is, folks that are watching, it's and like the doctor had said early on, it's not if, it's when this is going to happen. There's a good possibility, and like I said, in your lifetime, that you're probably the same age as I am. So for us to see something like this take place, I guess we'll all find out eventually, possibly, how this is going to affect us on this planet. Moving on to Brian Keith Prepper's question. He says, question for Dr. B. Does he think the magnetic field of the Earth will get worse here soon and possibly change very soon in our lifetime with the sun going into a cooler phase?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't have the answer. I don't think anybody in the world does. But it is interesting that every so often the Earth changes its magnetic field. It flips its poles around. So north becomes south and south becomes north. As weird as that is, it's not happened in modern civilization, even since before the Egyptians. It's never happened in our lifetimes or any human lifetimes, but it happens every so often. I don't know if it's every 10,000 or 100,000. It's a long period of time. But what's really interesting is, if it happens, there's a period of time when it's switching, when it's moving around, that the Earth is really exposed to the effects of the sun, the radiation effects of the sun. And so you can end up with lots and lots of problems to the species that are being exposed, as that magnetic, our magnetic fields help shield us from those charged particles. And as the magnetic field's changing, it ends up leaving us exposed for a period of time. Not to mention all the other problems we'd have with GPS and all these other things, right? But it takes a long time to happen. It doesn't happen, in a year it's flipped or anything like that. It maybe take hundreds of years to do a full switch like that. And then maybe it would last for 500 years and switch back. It's a weird thing. But as weird as it is, if you read the data, the poles are moving now in a way that's larger than they had been before. And so it's a very measurable thing where they can measure how many, feet or miles it's moved each year. And there are predictions of, if it continues at that rate, then it might pick up sort of movement speed at which it starts flipping faster. And some people predict that we're on the cusp of starting a cycle of flipping the poles. Now, I have no idea, because I think they move and they wobble and they change over time. And it won't affect anyone's lifetime that we're watching this show, because again, it takes a long time to do the full flip. But it could be enough that we all start going, ooh, what's going to happen to our great grandkids? They need to start preparing for this event, this global thing that's going to happen. And it's a fascinating thing. I did some reading about it a few months ago when somebody asked me about it, and I really got intrigued by it. I was going to write a book. I thought, man, that would be a great book, is in the period when the poles are switching, how mankind has to survive and adapt to that environment. So it's an interesting, and I don't have the answer of if it's happening right now or not, but it's an interesting question.
Intriguing. Yeah, no, that would probably be a great book. I don't know if I've read one like that yet. Let me see. Barbara has a question. She says, do I need to take my antenna down? It's very large and high.
I'm assuming that's an antenna product for like a ham radio or something, just a guess.
Ham radio, or possibly just maybe, I don't know if she uses it to receive like cable television, some of those high definition antennas and whatnot.
Yeah, I wouldn't think you'd need to take it down. Usually if it's like a ham radio, you can disconnect the antenna with an antenna switch, which just opens the path from the antenna to the radio. And I did a video on that as well, on protecting ham radios. So I would encourage, if that's what it's about, I encourage you to watch that video. It's a very low cost way of protecting them. There's about 3 steps you want to do to protect your radio systems. So check out that video. If it's for something else like your TV or things like that, I mean, you're wanting to use it anyway, I would just leave it up and use it. And yes, if an EMP occurs, it's probably going to blow out that TV, but that's going to be the least of your worries. So I'm not sure it's worth doing anything about. Now, if it's an amateur radio system, that might be real important to you during a disaster. So you probably do want to do some protective steps for that.
Agreed. Communications will be key in any type of disaster scenario. Let me see here. What do I say? Our tent life says, can an EMP be deployed into our southern hemisphere?
An EMP can be detonated anywhere, really.
Right.
If they were going to attack the United States, they would almost certainly either detonate it over one of the 2 coastal regions, so you can take out California or the East Coast, or they might try and detonate it over the central United States and go coast to coast, or some mix thereof. But yeah, it can be detonated anywhere.
Yeah, I've seen some of the models where they use it detonating like right over the Arkansas, Missouri, like kind of that dead center area, and have it resonate throughout the rest of the U.S. Smiling Wolf says, how do I keep and repair my truck during or after an EMP?
Yeah, there's not one particular right answer. You can do some protective things to start with so that maybe the truck doesn't get damaged. And the 2 ways of protecting are either to add protective devices like the traps, for example, and ferrites, or you can cover it with a big conductive car cover, which works really well, but they're just very expensive. They're several $1,000s for a big car cover like that, whereas the traps might be a couple $100. So those are the ways you can try and protect it ahead of time. And then afterward, spare parts, get somebody to figure out what's wrong with it and get them repaired. Not all cars, despite what people think, and you read books like 1 Second After and stuff, which are good fiction. A lot of cars would not be damaged. Some would, some wouldn't. And so, maybe the car wouldn't be damaged anyway, or maybe it would just shut off and you could recycle the battery and go right back to your business. the trouble with cars is not really that every car is going to be damaged. It's that even if a percentage of cars are damaged, let's say 10%, 10% of the operating vehicles in the United States all went out at the same time, you can only imagine the chaos that would ensue on every major interstate and every major road, and all of the accidents and all of the cars that would need to be repaired, and collisions, and it would be a mess. It would be a mess unlike anything we've ever seen before. So, and then there would be the problems of getting fuel afterward and things like that too. So it'd be a big, huge problem just from the transportation side.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm reading, I'm onto another series of books. I can't remember, James Leslie Rawls, I think it is, if I recall correctly. And one of the tools that they're using is a solar pump to pump gas out of gas stations and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, they have to exist. And I was like, curiously if I wanted to grab one of those and kind of keep them in, as a backup, just in case that situation does arise. Because I was like, that is actually a pretty good idea. And that's kind of why I like to read a lot of the fiction books, because they do have some practicality to things that you could possibly do, or scenarios and whatnot.
Yep.
Let me see. Dragon Slayer has a question. It says, does an EMP shield sold by a few companies attaching to the battery only work for an EMP, or do I need something plugged into my other outlets? And what do I need?
I'm not sure of that question exactly.
Right.
I don't like to comment about anybody else's product. So if that's for a different product, I would leave it to the company to answer that. So I'm not sure how to answer that one. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. Let me see here. Let me see. Ms. Me Today says, is there any easy solution in protecting a brain box on an automobile from an EMP?
Yeah, there's not an easy solution, unfortunately. That's why we talk about doing the traps and the ferrites in the cars, because it's not just one, not just the engine control unit or any of that. There's all kind of processors around the car. And so you kind of have to put in a multi-point protection to try and bring that energy down, keep it from getting too high. Now, people can look at, the problem with cars is they're all a little different, right? Everybody's car is a little different. Right. And so there's no one solution that you could just definitively say, hey, do these 4 things and that car's going to survive. The only exception to that is if you cover it. If you fully cover a vehicle, the energy is going to be low enough the car is going to survive. I'm confident enough to say that. But anything else is very dependent on the vehicle. Some vehicles are more susceptible, some are less susceptible. So you do these preparations with the expectation is I've done what I can for my vehicle, and fingers crossed in a sense of, hopefully it's not super susceptible and something gets blown out that won't recover.
Right. I appreciate all the information. Let me see here. Kind of scrolling through. Here we go. Infrared Survival says, does Dr. Bradley know the future? Can he let us know when the EMP will occur? Time and date, please, and thank you.
Yeah. Well, I wish.
I think we all wish.
Well, I'll tell you this. No, I don't know the future, of course, but the difficulty with an EMP, unlike a CME, remember I said a CME, you got a couple days notice, right? So you know it's coming. It's no surprise to anybody. Now, what's the surprise is what is the effect of it? Nobody knows what the effect will be.
Right.
But an EMP is different in that there might be 10 people in the entire United States that know it's about to occur, right? 10 people in high enough positions that know, oh crap, we're going to have a detonation in the next 4 minutes or something like that. Nobody else will know. And so even when it occurs, when the EMP occurs, no one will know that it's occurred because it's so high in the atmosphere. You're not going to hear it. You're not going to know, other than all of a sudden things might start having problems, right? So it sure would be nice if there was a device that could withstand an EMP and tell you that one had just occurred. And I don't want to spoil it, but someone I know has been working on that for a long time. And I should have something available that people can look at to do that. It's a really interesting product.
That's pretty intriguing for sure.
Yeah.
And definitely beneficial. Let me see here. Big Dog says, Gray, please ask if America was, please ask if America was with an EMP, would our military be able to, or I guess if America was hit by an EMP, would our military be able to respond with our own EMP or nuke in return?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, EMPs are in the U.S. arsenal as well, just like Russia and China's and others.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Many of the military systems have been hardened for electromagnetic pulse. We had the big trestle system back, I don't know if it was in the 70s or 80s, that they big wooden structure. They tested a lot of military systems versus an EMP. So military systems are pretty hardened, but so I suspect our warfighting capability would suffer, but it wouldn't suffer. It wouldn't be catastrophically damaged.
Yeah, we wouldn't have. We would still have recourse.
Yeah.
RC says, would battery operates power tools, or would be relatively safe from EMP? What about the batteries themselves? I'm assuming he's talking about like the Ryobis and the DeWalt's and all like that.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yeah, they're probably okay. Not 100% certain. And I mentioned earlier, some people do store them away in their Faraday cages just in case. Batteries by themselves, if they don't have built-in charge circuitry, are not susceptible. So like your AA batteries and your 9-volt batteries, those don't need to be stored. They're not going to be damaged. But once you attach it to something, then things can be damaged. And batteries that have their own built-in charge control systems in them, which some lithium-ion batteries do, they can be damaged. Those charge control things can. So I think it's possible for them to be damaged, but I don't think it's real likely that your power tools would be damaged, assuming they're not plugged into the wall, that they're just freestanding.
Yeah, I figure if they're plugged in, they're still having that way that current can travel and whatnot.
Yeah, right.
Cherokee, I'll ask the question, but I don't know if there's an answer for it. He says, Cherokee Survivalist says, my question, EMP or CME versus 5G? And I don't know.
what the question. Yeah. So, well, we can talk 5G for a second, because while it's a contentious topic, at least people ought to be a little bit informed. So 5G is a category of communications technology, right? We're moving into this 5G world where they use very high frequencies to send out communication information, right, for our cell phones and so forth. And the worry is that the worry by those who worry about it is that it hasn't been tested well enough to know the effects on humans, this very high frequency energy. And I get the worry. I understand, the society's not above doing bad things, right, just to make a buck. And the thing about 5G is when you get to very high frequencies, that energy gets blocked super easy. High frequencies are very easy to block. So even like the trees and the shrubs and things can block this energy. And so that, unfortunately, what that means is they have to put antennas everywhere. Like every few hundred meters, they have to have another antenna. So they're not going to just be giant towers. They're going to be these little antennas on lampposts and things like that all over the place to get enough range where you can communicate with it. And so people are worried that, now I don't just have the antenna 6 miles away. I've got these freaking little antennas all over me, radiating me 24/7 in my house. And I understand all of that. I don't know that there's any way to convince people it is a danger or it's not a danger without a lot of scientific study, and that would be the right way to do it. The early scientific studies said, no, it doesn't look like it hurts cells. It can't even pass through the skin. It gets absorbed by the skin. So it's not going to very likely cause like organ cancers or things like that. But then people wonder, well, what about my eyes, or what about skin cancer? I mean, fair questions, all fair questions. And I don't think the firm answer is out there yet. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably going to end up being safe. There were similar concerns about 4G, LTE, those things. But I can't say with certainty until a body of data has been gathered and people take a look at the effects of it. So it's a different technology, though. It's fair to ask the question because it is different, because it has to be so distributed now in all the neighborhoods and everything like that. It's a different technology. And we have not routinely been exposed to those frequencies. So it's a fair question to ask. I don't think people should be climbing towers and burning them down or anything, but it's okay, I think, to ask the question.
I appreciate your honesty with that. You know what I mean? Because I know of the technology. I hear, the different things. I watched the whole issue unfold with the airplanes, so the airports, wanting to shut down and stuff and all that stuff like that. So I agree. It's definitely something to look into, and, only I guess time will tell how it all plays out, as with anything and within technology. Let me see. It says, Lily B says, is our ability to respond to an EMP militarily a good deterrent to other countries? And from my perspective, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The trick of the EMP would not be like Russia using an EMP, because if Russia decided they're going to use an EMP over the United States, they know that's a declaration of war, right? And they don't want U.S. missiles flying over their country either. The problem with the EMP is when a country like, let's say, North Korea, where maybe the dictator, decides he's got terminal cancer and he wants to do something and going out with a bang, or when a terrorist organization gets the capability to launch a missile high enough with a nuclear weapon, they don't really stand anything to lose, right? And so it's an asymmetric attack that could cause huge problems for the U.S. And they may feel like, well, what are they going to do about it? You know, there's not much they can do if you don't know who the enemy is, or if the enemy's already sort of easy to destroy anyway. So I don't think the threat is so much from a big, powerful country. That's just be one threat from them. Now, you know, if Russia attacks us, it would be an EMP and nuclear bombs and all kinds of other things, right? But it's really more of the terrorist actions that might be more worrisome for that.
Oh man, I love my viewers. They're funny. And I see some folks are, we touched that 5G topic, and some folks, where did I see it at? I saw it somewhere here. It says, Muzzle Flash says, watch the helicopter fire 5G at soldiers on the battlefield. They all dropped their weapons and ran away. I have not seen that video yet.
I hadn't either. Maybe that's some good propaganda, though. You know, if
Could
anybody thought you had that weapon, you know, that would be pretty good.
And then Bringer of Change says, it was even a corporate news with new iPhones burning people with radiation. I think that's what it meant to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, there's strong opinions about it. And I'm not going to take a hard line one way or the other about it.
And I'm trying to make sure, I'm looking now to see, I appreciate that, Donna. And good night, Stuart. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything, because I think we're pretty much going to wrap this up here. We've been going for over an hour and 15 minutes. And I do want to apologize if I missed your question. I do apologize. You guys know on Thursday night when I do the live stream, I'll do a wrap up and we'll do some questions there and talk about this whole live stream and stuff like that. And, you know, it's hard to get every single question answered. I appreciate that, Lily B. And you as well, Dr. D. Bringer of Change says that was back when 4G was the new, where was it at? They fixed the issue. Ibram, one, thank you for the super chat. Truly appreciate that. Do cars and grills get charged by an EMP like I was told they do in the 80s if a car was struck by lightning or myth? Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I get the question now. That's a more clear to me. The answer is no. They don't get charged. There's not actually a path by which electrical charge is flowing, unlike lightning. Lightning, of course, you're breaking down the air and you're bringing a conductive charge down onto the surface of something. But an EMP is really just an energy wave, meaning that you're not bringing down charged elements onto the surface of something, which can then maintain a charge like a big capacitor. So it's not going to build up charge on something that you could then go touch and get zapped or something like that. Rather, it's going to reorient the charge that's already built into the conductor and create a field on that item that could damage the electronics. But once the EMP is over in that, milliseconds of once the E2 is over, all of the charge goes back to where it was. It doesn't keep a potential across it. So it's a different sort of thing. Lightning is a very different phenomenon than an EMP, but you wouldn't have to worry about being shocked, from a buildup of charge.
Interesting. And I threw up the other question in there. Empress Kimberly says, would you have to keep anything in a Faraday cage from touching the metal?
Yeah, I wish of all the things I'd ever told people I was clearer about that, because I get asked that a lot. If the Faraday cage is metal on the inside, you want to make sure that nothing metal of yours touches the inside wall of the can, which is why many people line their Faraday cages with cardboard or plastic or other things that's non-conductive. If your electronics is already in plastic, like many of our electronics are already housed in plastic and it has no exposed metal, you could just put it right down in the can and not worry about it, okay? So most people take the time and they just wrap up the inside of their cans with something non-conductive just to be on the safe side.
I agree, Bonnie. I agree. And it looks like I'm almost to the bottom here. We are all nerds today. Right on, KT. Right on, KT. Let me see. Thank you to Dr. Graham. This is one of the best lives I've seen. I appreciate that. That being said, I want to say thank you to every single one of you folks out there who tuned into this. Like I said, Dr. Bradley is full of great knowledge, and that's why I tell folks you can follow. Like down in the description, I have his website as well as his YouTube link down there. Because then he kind of dives into more stuff and kind of uses some of the products and does some of experiments and things like that. So you can check out and get more of Dr. Bradley. You know what I mean? And if you go do subscribe to Dr. Bradley, let him know that Gray sent you. I'm just kind of scrolling through here. Excellent live stream. Let me see, definitely a wealth of information. And yes, this will be here forever, so you guys can watch it again, take notes and all that stuff like that. I appreciate you guys. And I'm just kind of cutting through here. All right, I think I'm down at the end of this. So first of all, like I said, thank you all for joining us on this live stream. Truly appreciate that. Very intriguing questions. Like I said, if you guys get an opportunity, share this out. Share it on social media, Twitter, Getter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever like that, folks, that you might find that this might be helpful to view. So I appreciate that. Mods, you guys did an excellent job. I truly appreciate all you folks out there as well for keeping everything family friendly, dropping the links, and staying on top of things. I appreciate that. So all in all, I want to say thank you guys. And also you, Dr. Bradley, truly appreciate you taking the time to come on here and answer these questions and taking the time out to engage with these folks here in the prepping community. Which is very appreciated.
Yeah,
do you have any parting thoughts? Oh, no problem. Anytime. Do you have any parting thoughts that you would like to leave the folks with?
No, I tried to answer the questions as best I could. Keep in mind that I'm just one person. I just have the knowledge that I have. I'm not always right about everything. So if you do your homework and you find that, I disagree, I think he was all wet on that, that's okay too. I always encourage people to go out and dig deep on things. And on occasion, I find that I was wrong on something, I correct myself. So don't take it as gospel. Just take it as my best guess on the things that you asked me about.
No, that makes absolutely sense. We're only human, folks, and we have so much knowledge, and we try to share it, and then we learn from each other. It's just an exchange of ideas, and hopefully we can all gain something from this live stream in regards to Dr. Bradley's knowledge in this field of things. And Dr. Bradley, if you can hold on a second while I close this out, I appreciate that. Other than that, folks, please be safe out there. Again, down below, Dr. Bradley's YouTube link, also his website link. I also have a discount code, which Harvey has posted there. If you decide to purchase anything from the website, you'll save some money. All right. All right. I'll take you. See you guys later. I'll probably see you guys on Thursday nights live. Other than that, God bless. Stay safe, folks.